and welcome back to another episode of In Conversation With, a series of interviews with Singaporean writers, publishers, educators, and more. In this episode, my guest interviewer, Daryl Lim, and I speak to the ever delightful Yeow Kai Chai about the philosophical and the literary, the nebulous and the granular. What is a good poem? What does it mean to understand something? And for the Kai Chai fanboys out there, why lakes and why towers? For 1 hour, the enigmatic author of Secret Manta, Pretend I'm Not Here, and One to the Dark Tower comes, puts his cards on the table, and gives us generous insight into his life and his mind. Personally, I was completely confounded by my first reading of Dark Tower. The words formed an unscalable wall. But read again and again, without the academic need for comprehension or close reading, I began to simply immerse myself in the intriguing worlds the words conjured up. The wall was still unscalable. After all, you can't really say, I know what a Kai Chai poem means exactly, but the bricks began to speak. Kai Chai's voice is singular, singularly coy. Its practiced art of seduction, revealing itself slowly after repeated reading, betrays a sadomasochistic king. For some, this foreplay can be frustrating and tiresome. For others, there might be delight in the teasing and the tussle. Ultimately, despite the apparent suspension of meaning and feeling, there is a human voice I am encountering, because it is playful. Kai Chai embraces the playfulness of postmodernism, and he sure gets a kick out of it. Without further ado, in conversation with Yeow Kai Chai.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Sploosh. So today I'm here with Daryl Lim, and we're interviewing Yeow Kai Chai.
Hello.
So for those of you who do not know him, he's a poet whose most recent work, One to the Dark Tower Comes, won the Singapore Literature Prize last year. He has had a long time in the media industry working as a journalist at the Straits Times, and he was also formerly the director of the Singapore Writers' Festival. So I think to just warm us up, Kai Chai, what have you been reading, watching, or listening to recently?
Yeah, so the latest book I've gotten, well, it was a gift from Yong Shu Hung, a fellow poet who knows I like her writing. Yeah, so it's called A Film in Which I Play Everyone. The title itself is from a David Bowie interview where a journalist asked him, what's your next project? And then, I don't know whether it's in a facetious way, he said that I like to make a film in which I play everyone. So I thought it touches on all the things I like, like films and role-playing and stuff. It sounds a bit weird for a 10 a.m. interview. But anyway, and Toby Martinez de la Rivas, I don't know that's how you pronounce his name, is a British poet whose third book is called Flood Meadows. It's a book about incantations, a kind of Ted Hughes pastoral, but a bit of interdisciplinary stuff. So again, one of those things that I like. So these two books are realistically the real books that I'm reading. There are a lot of other stuff that I'm reading for fun and for torture. Listening to music-wise, the latest is the Sufjan Stevens album called Javelin, which is about, only after the fact that we know that it's about the death of his partner.
I thought it's useful to start off with some sense of biography. Maybe even before I talk about the first question, which is about when you wanted to start writing poetry. Maybe tell us a bit about your family background, how you grew up. Was there even a sense then that you would be an artist of some sort?
Well, I guess I am the only one in my family to go to the university, and I'm the youngest of four. So in that sense, I do feel kind of the idea of loneliness, the one that's odd one out and everything. But I also felt that I should live up to my parents' expectations. So they're not educated or anything, but they believe in education. So your question is that, how do I? Yeah. So it's not a cultural milieu that you would expect, but I think they left it to me to discover things on my own, and I was discover television, discover films, music at a very young age, and I absorbed almost everything. So I'd never had the distinction of having to say that, oh, I only listen to high art or like classical music, and then I can't listen to pop music. So I never had that prejudice for or against any particular genre of stuff. So only when I got into writing and creative writing, when I realized, oh, okay, you're not supposed to write certain kinds of writing because they are not seen as true writing. Yeah, then that's where I realized there's a hierarchy of taste levels. Not that I'm exempt from, but I feel that if you start from that, you'll never write things which you're not necessarily good at, or know that you're not good at or good at. So if you have already set out limitations as to what you want to write, then you just self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You only write the things that you think you're good at, but actually you suck at it. Or you never had a chance to write things which you never know you're actually quite good at it, because you already felt that I want to be a certain kind of writer.
In terms of art form, so actually what was the first art form that really attracted you? So I
See, the word art form is problematic, right?
could be
I
music,
guess
could be
media.
film,
Yeah, I guess media would be it. So television, films. I watched a lot of films growing up because my mom, I don't know whether, never mind, I threw her under the bus. Dragged me, just carried me to watch like a horror movie. Like, I don't know whether you're all very young. In the 1970s, like open air cinema, or like watch scary Asian horror film, 1970, like Snake Woman, what kind of thing. Like, so these films are not really appropriate for anyone, infants or kids. But yeah, so I enjoyed it as kind of a communal activity, a kind of space to get transported. The idea of transformation, the idea of, oh, you don't have to be stuck in a particular world that you are birthed into. You can imagine different worlds. I guess that's probably the seed of why or how I write, I guess. Yeah.
And then how did that link in some way to, because film is film and music is music, but writing, of course, is a leap from that. So how did you start to then write from, although your first, in some ways, influences were film?
Yeah, the funny thing is that I did not grow up in an English-speaking family. So the real contact with the English language was when I was in primary school, kindergarten, I guess, yeah. But it wasn't something that was spoken at home. But so when I went into primary school or kindergarten, I realized that, oh, there's some people who could speak English, and then I felt like, oh, I couldn't, right? But I guess I was competitive. I always felt that just because you started first doesn't mean I couldn't catch up with you. So I guess I realized English was something which I could excel at, and probably the one that I find quite empowering, that you can go anywhere, right? I mean, it's kind of step to everything for a person who's born into, I wouldn't say I was middle class, obviously lower than middle class. So English language became a vessel, a channel to discovering so many different worlds, especially in Singapore in the 1970s, 80s, yeah.
Do you recall the first thing you tried to write? The first creative work that you tried to write?
Consciously, it would be in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. I think there was a school student magazine called Student World that was read by students of that time, and you could win like $10 first prize, second prize. So I participated, and I thought, I won. So I think I wrote silly limericks and things that rhyme as you would when you were starting out, like poetry has to rhyme. And I don't have the copy anymore. But I won. I mean, it's a kind of national competition, right? Actually, I don't know about distribution, but it was distributed among schools, primary schools. In my mind, there were interesting poems, but perhaps they are not really that good. But that gave me some kind of confidence that maybe I should explore creative writing. But at that time, you don't want to go in. Maybe nobody wanted you to go into the arts, because poetry is a luxury. Yeah, we cannot afford. So really, honestly, art is something that you do as an aside, not something that you do as part of. Like, proudly say I'm a poet would be so embarrassing. I don't know whether you all remember the time when you would not say you're a poet.
Yeah, I think growing up, the possibility of a career in the arts was quite remote. in the 90s. Yeah. Even then, I think after that, it really changed, like maybe in the last 15 or 10 years. Okay, one more question. Just do you recall the first book or literary work that really captured your imagination?
Captured my imagination, but it was so young, right? I mean, Annie Blyton, everybody would have read. So yeah, Annie Blyton, the Famous Five, all those stuff. Yeah, so I guess my dad, again, he just bought me lots of books. I mean, he didn't read to me, but he just, and therefore you just pick up and I read them all the politically incorrect, like gollywogs and stuff. Oops. Yeah. So basically, reading them, not just purely for the language, but just again the different type of worlds that there's another world out there somewhere in this mythical land, right? I don't know, England or whatever. So yeah, so the language and the metaphors, I guess osmosis, you don't read, it's not studied or anything, it's just something that naturally you just, yeah. So I think all those want to capture my imagination. But if you ask me about literary, like very consciously, that would be like secondary school, right? That would be, yeah, we'll come to that, right?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I like the idea of England as a fictional country, because in some ways it was like as remote as a mythological land.
Yeah, exactly. The weather is different. The people look different. I mean, they were. I don't know whether you all have seen the books. There were illustrations. They look.
I know the ones that you are talking about. Yeah.
I know your archivist. You collect sorts of.
Yes. Maybe we talk a little bit about film, since that has already dominated the discussion. And in some ways, I think film is very influential for you. So maybe just talk a little bit about how film, what impact it had on you. And I think we will come to that a bit more as we talk about the writing itself. But also how that influences your writing. And in some ways, the two for you are quite linked.
I think films have been and are still an escape for most Singaporeans, right? Okay, maybe when you were growing up, maybe not your time, sorry. In the 80s, going to the cinema was an adventure. Just going to the cinema itself. It's not like now it's so easy and you just choose cinemas very easy, or it's all streaming. So the idea of going to cinema was a kind of special occasion for my family. So for many Singaporeans. So the idea of watching it in a communal setting, as I mentioned, it was so special, and watching the audience as well was special. So in a way, cinema was the actualization of everything that I imagined I would want to do in my writing, right? Because you have a 3D environment, you will see some kind of projection, you notice. I mean, you hear. Okay, so it's sense around. So all the auditory, the tactile, the olfactory, all those senses are being invoked in a cinematic experience. So it's not just the movie, but the whole movie-going experience. So in that way, I sort of to link to my writing. I'm hoping to invoke all these sensory experiences rather than purely to absorb it on a textual level, on a word level. So it's meant to be hyper real, more like beyond words. And I think one of the questions which you sent to me earlier was to kind of catch me off guard, to say what I said many years ago to Desmond Con about that I don't understand everything. Essentially, it's like a cinematic experience, right? When you watch a movie, do you understand everything that you watch? Not on the first time that you watch, right? Perhaps you are too young, or maybe you didn't watch everything, you went toilet or whatever, or you were sleeping or whatever. So to fully feel a film, you have to immerse yourself over and over again. So I would like to think of my books as something which you don't necessarily understand. I hate the word understand. Actually, I want you to just immerse in it. Understanding is fraught, and it can be judgmental. Yeah,
in some ways, I guess the posture of understanding is maybe not the right approach to art, be it film or be it a poetry, right? You don't really want to intellectually understand works of art.
I think it's also because of the way we're taught in school about literature. Like, what is this poem about?
Correct.
Can you imagine that would be the first question? Right? So what's it about? Oh my god, that would be the encapsulation of what like you're circumscribed. What is poem about, and that is the model answer. But the truth is that maybe that's not what the poem is about.
That's right. I mean, just to add on to this, I think it'd be absurd to ask someone, what is this painting about? Or like,
It would be, right?
or how do you understand this painting?
Yeah, I also don't want the artist or the poet or anyone to explain his or her own poem, because I don't know, as a writer, you wouldn't want people to only interpret a poem the way you want it to be. In fact, I like misreadings, but again, you got to be careful what I said. You got to take my words with a pinch of salt. I like misreadings because misreadings sometimes open up different conversations rather than say, "Oh, you're wrong. That's not what my poem is about." In fact, I think that once you write something, it's not for you to dictate how it should be read. I'm not saying that you can be like far off of it, but I like the idea of possibilities, and maybe perhaps it opens up other ways of looking at things, and then you could be wrong. None of us are 100% right all the time, and I like to learn from the readers actually. Yeah, I love to learn it from younger generations who are exposed to different things. If I were your age, what would I write? I guess that's what. Or if you were my age, would you write my stuff, or would you just write like a lot of my contemporaries? Oops, don't want to name names, right?
It's okay. We can go into that later. Since we're on writing, maybe we can jump a bit to the writing itself, because we have a few questions there. I'll let Hao Yang, who has done a lot of study and work for the questions, do his thing.
But yeah, I think for most readers, right, the general impression of your writing is that it's really hard to understand, right? The word again, understand, right? And especially so in later works, especially once the Dark Tower comes. So now I was reading the critical introduction on poetry.sg. So David Wong writes, the pursuit of the image drives memory and experience. These are classical things you look out for in poetry, right? So far from their point of origin, that sentiment is abstracted out of existence. So I'll read a sample from the poem Once the Dark Tower Comes in that collection. Ditch those breastplates, prop up the tailboard, and have some marshmallows. Then let's talk about why you are banging on the wrong one. Pizzicato strings seesaw for the answer dangling. So it's quite hard, I guess, for the average reader to, I guess, find feeling or meaning in these lines, right? And so it does not quite fit, really conventional understandings of poetry as, what Wordsworth says, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, or as a means of, ordering human experience into something meaningful that you can convey to other people, right? So perhaps to begin with, I would like to just ask you, like, what do you see a poem as? And then what is a good poem to you?
I mean, I like all your references, and I would say it's fair to say that it's not easy to read my poetry and not feel frustrated. So I would not be delusional to think that what I write is understandable. But again, that's why I said that perhaps that's kind of foolhardy errand to start with that, because if you start with the idea of wanting to understand every single word, then you will get trapped into trying to solve mysteries, while my priority is not to lead you from point A to point B, but actually to let you loose in this universe of maybe red herrings and cul-de-sacs and stuff. And I don't like to explain. Yeah. So you ask me what is a poem, what is a good poem. I don't like to explain because I like the audience or the readers. I use the word audience partly because I like it to be something that the frustration is part of it. Yeah, kind of. I'm kind of a sadomasochist. I like the reader to feel like, oh my God, this is so horrible, or this is. I've read NUS honors thesis. This is somebody who did a thesis on me and a few other writers, and I think she really hated my poetry. Yeah. No, it's okay to hate, but it's how you explain it, and I was like, okay, you obviously asked the wrong questions. So again, I because as a reviewer myself, as someone who does reviewing, did reviewing in my time in ST, it's fine. It's actually fair to also judge the reviewer. Just as the reviewer reviews stuff, you can also review the reviewer, right? So I think it's fair. So I just say that, now you ask the wrong question, so I don't really take your words too seriously. Maybe, but part of the frustration is also exactly the glee that I also want, because that means that she's unable to experience the poetry. Like she would like to think that the other poetry she understood and she really loves them, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. But because she chose my poetry, I mean, I didn't force her to choose, but she just didn't realize that actually it's so different, different armory of tools, and I guess she wasn't open to it or doesn't really know how to talk about it. Or maybe she has a deadline. Oops, she has a thesis deadline. And I think that's scarier. I would say that, yeah, I don't really want to define a poem or what a good poem is. I think you need to define a poem or even what a good poem is on your own terms. Like, I can tell you, this is a poem, but actually it's a prose passage, or this is actually an essay. But I think in this day and age, without me saying, I'm sure you have seen a lot of your contemporaries, a lot of them are writing stuff which normally would have been classified as an essay, but it calls itself a poem. Why? We haven't entered the grey area called prose poem, and something like what Sean Hood did, right? Would that qualify as poetry maybe 10 years ago? 10 years ago, maybe, yeah, it might be. But the truth is that a poem is a very porous entity that absorbs all the other genres, and you can call itself whatever. It's kind of a rebel, a kind of a shapeshifter. Unfortunately, that one doesn't apply. The kind of doesn't apply too much to the rest of the genres like prose or maybe creative nonfiction. Yeah, but you think about it, poetry these days is almost scarier, right? For anyone who's like, "Oops, this is so different from what I studied in school 10 years ago." It's like, "Oh, me, this is called poetry as well," and that's what I like. Yeah.
I thought maybe I just jump in here, and in some ways I see Kai Chai's his work as a series of innuendos. And of course, innuendos means you either get it or it can mean many things to you, or it cannot. So that's one way of seeing it. The other way, which I just thought of, another metaphor that I thought of for your poems is, in some ways, an alien artifact. So you kind of stumble upon alien artifacts as you go about, and in some ways you're trying to figure out what is the origin of this artifact. They come from outer space. Who made it? And so in some ways, I think of these two ways of thinking about your poetry. Yeah.
No, I really like that image. Yeah, for all the cinematic evocations that it does, and I really like it. Thank you very much. I will use it and attribute it to you.
Okay, so next for a more, I guess, historical kind of question, right? So, there are some continuities from Secret Manta to Once the Dark Tower Comes. I like identify attention to objects and images, use of illusions, shifting perspectives, play with language, and kind of rightly self-consciousness. But while Secret Manta is still grounded in familiar concerns, like whether it's family or local concerns, right? Dark Tower, it's more opaque, right? Yeah. And it's as if the linguistic and semantic concerns have now become, both style and substance. And to me, I guess that kind of trajectory mirrors the progression, I guess, from programmatic to non-programmatic music, for example, in 20th century, right? Or from figurative to non-figurative art. Before we dive deeper into the individual collections, could you just tell us about how your approach to poetry has changed over the years or remained the same?
Yeah, I think if you put it that way, it's true. Yeah, I mean, the Secret Manta wasn't exactly the way I wanted it to be honest. I mean, it was published by Landmark. I had an editor called Leslie Yeow, who is not related to me. Yeah. So what she did was, at that time, was that she took out what I thought were the difficult poems. Yeah. So she kept more of the familiar poem. Yeah. So it became a collection that's really primarily about family, and which is fine. But it wasn't what I intended to be. It was meant to be called The Dumb Creatures, which has all the double play of the. It's based on a quote from Virginia Woolf about what she said, that we think of animals as the dumb creatures, but actually they can say a lot more. But I guess that's again too a bit too esoteric. But anyway, it became very much more familial and family. But when it came to Pretend I'm Not Here, I was approached by Enoch from First Fruits, who read my, I think he read the August Moon in QRS, so, and of course the book, and he said that he would like to publish me. So at the time I moved because I thought that he's drawn to the so-called opaque poems rather than the transparent poems, if you're using that metaphor. And I thought, okay, let's just go with it. So Pretend I'm Not Here was me saying that I don't have to give a damn about trying to please anyone. I have to be myself. So I wrote, it's a combination of poems that I wrote even during the Secret Manta days that never made it into Secret Manta, but they were, and also poems which, I was already in the Straits Times at that time, so I was entertainment editor, I was reviewing music, movies and stuff. And Pretend Not Here, I call it a collection based on the death of the author, as you may know, and the idea of you can be who you want to be in the absence of the person, the absence of the author, to pretend I'm not here. So it has that ironic thing. And then when it comes to One of the Dark Tower Comes, so Pretend I'm Not Here is the absence, and so I like to sell it. And then One of the Dark Tower Comes is the presence. Yeah. So that's only one way to look at it. Pretend I'm Not Here is also about the death of my grandmother. And yeah, that's my grandmother, but there was other deaths as well. And then One of the Dark Tower Comes, it's the death of my father. Yes. But essentially they're both death obsessed. Okay, so in terms of what you just said about programmatic and whether it's more, I actually thought One of the Dark Tower Comes is, for me, is less difficult to access, actually. I find that the frame is deliberately more discernible. Therefore, I think as a collection, I thought it was, I hate to say, I know it's controversial, but I thought it was actually easier to understand. But I meant understand in the sense that you can talk about it in terms of frame and structure, maybe not in terms of meaning per se. And I thought Pretend I'm Not Here was more chaotic. Yeah, it was actually more like a middle finger to structure and everything. And in fact, there was a series of poems called Memento Mori. Yeah, but I think, yes, this one is more, the latest is a little less, framework-wise, was more obvious. So actually, I disagree with your reading that this was the most difficult collection. Some people have told me, I don't know, some people have given me very conflicting things, but this is the first time I thought, first thing that I heard that this was the most difficult. I actually thought it was that.
I wanted to jump in here more on a biographical point, but I love the phrase you just used. You said a middle finger to structure, something like that. so we should immortalize that quote. Okay, but I wanted to comment on a biographical point. In some ways, what Leslie Yeow did in Landmark for your book kind of reflects the times, right? Because actually there's a question here about the times, because in some ways your trajectory as a poet in Singapore is very much out of time, in the sense of when you were writing and publishing, your contemporaries were writing more lyrical works, they're writing more confessional, which makes Leslie Yeow's move to edit Secret Manta in a family oriented. That sounds very weird, but in a familial way, understandable. So I wanted to ask really how you tell us a bit more about how you felt as you were writing through this journey, and when you were writing in a way to build on the alien artifact metaphor. You were an alien in this world of lyrical and confessional poets. How do you feel, and how in some ways has that evolved?
I wasn't published as a collection until 2001, but I was very active in the 1990s. I was part of the notorious 1995 Singapore Lit Prize shortlisted generation, if you know what I'm trying to say, because oh my god, I'm going to throw people under the bus again.
No, tell us more.
There was okay, without do your own research. There was somebody who won it that we didn't think deserved to win. The second prize person was Wei Kim Cheng, who I'm very happy to lost to, actually. to have lost to. But I was like, why this person who won? Not that I have nothing against him per se, but the collection wasn't. It's like I knew that this collection will not withstand the test of time. But I knew right away that Days of No Name would be a classic. I was like, how is it possible that they can get it? They would get it so wrong. So anyway, I started writing in those times where it was quite pedantic to, like, in order to be a poet that is accepted by the establishment, meaning the universities, you have to write a certain way because you need endorsement by certain people because they will tend to write forward for you, have blurb. Nothing wrong with that. I have nothing against that because I was a lit student, so this were my prof, and I mean, so, but I knew right away that my poetry would be sidelined and marginalized. So I have to be grateful that I even got published by Landmark. Yeah. So my aim was I have to get published, right? And I didn't want to go into self-publishing because then that means that's again, like, you would not be credible. And then at that time they published poetry books in trios. I don't know. You remember? They like to publish. I was published together with To Sian Min and another, I forgot her name. Another poet. Anyway, that's what happened. So, yeah. But anyway, so that was the time. What was the question again?
It's always, how did you deal with the loneliness? Go back to the question of the loneliness.
I wasn't lonely insofar as I hung up with all of them. They were friends. In fact, we all wrote very differently.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I felt the most like left out of all, in terms of the fact that there's no way I could share.
The most outlier.
I mean, I don't want to use such word, but basically we are friends, right? So they have seen my writing. Some, I mean, sometimes I feel like they were just like, I'm the odd one out, but kind of like tolerate me. But so it's fine lah. I don't have any issue. So once I got published and I got feedback, and maybe some no feedback, or maybe I got a horrible review in the Straits Times. Yeah, but it's better to be reviewed than no review lah. Yeah. So, but I think Pretend I'm Not Here was when I started sensing the shift in the air. Like there were people who are reading, and there were people who are maybe not educated in a certain sort of like Anglo-American tradition. Well, I don't have anything against it, but more like they're not just reading dead white poets. They're reading all sorts of stuff. And I was educated. I did this course called Modern American Late 20th Century with a prof called Dr. Gilbert Adair, who introduced me to the groundbreaking works of American writings, Dos Passos and all those, like Donald Barthelme. Basically a lot of fiction, but also poetry. And me and somebody else called Alfie Lee, who was my classmate, who's now in New York, started writing in that way, very meta, very poetry language with a kind of, So all those schools of poetry, to be fair, I think these are traditional. To me, they are traditional. They are how many decades old. But in Singapore, it had never arrived at that point. But so I guess you're right. I know one of the questions was about my American inclination. But for me, just that the Americans seem to be more exposed to experimentation, less encumbered by tradition, and able to reinvent themselves kind of in an American cultural way. They like to kind of respond, and then so I think the 20th century's writings of that time, Alfie and I and a few other people were looking out for such writings that they're not easily found. They were not easily found because there was no internet. So the only outlet was to go to the library, the National Library, and look and ransack and find one or two, and then we will share, and then we try to hoodwink the librarian to order more books, And I read like the Village Voice, other kinds of newspapers, cultural journals. So it's not really just purely poetry, but it's also all the other cultural artifacts that signal the change, like Interview magazine, a lot of things that were very exciting at the time. The advent of MTV. You imagine those are the time when there was no internet, so you really anything new, anything that you really would be excited by, as opposed to now where you have the internet. I guess there's a certain of blasé, like, okay, I can watch this later. I'm not quite sure whether you all are sensitized to new things as heartfelt as it would be for us. I think the very fact that you did not have any choice, that you had to make an effort to find these new things, means that there's a, I don't know how you all felt, but when you discover something on your own that nobody had listened to or read, you felt that it was your own, right? You felt it was a baby. You felt very like possessive, and you want to be the advocate. So I think that sense of passion, the kind of like nothing is given to you on a platter, unlike these days where things are around you all the time, while there's a wealth of information around you, it takes a lot more effort to find the thing that you like. And it's very more difficult to say that you discover it.
Yeah. It's kind of the thrill of discovery, right? That you get. Which in a way actually very well describes the way I felt when I first read your poetry, when I first discovered you, this alien artifact that was you. So, but actually the first feeling when I read Pretend I'm Not Here was actually bewilderment. And I think that speaks to the point that actually in some ways, although the 1920s and modernism and post-modernism and all these things were already past,
Yeah.
in Singapore they hadn't quite arrived.
No.
So I think that was the feeling that I got. And the bewilderment slowly switched to appreciation for me after like maybe 5 years or so, as I begin to understand what you were trying to do. And I think that in some ways encapsulates your reception quite well. But do you think there's a shift? Because I think now we come to the second part of the story where, as you said, things were beginning to shift after Pretend I'm Not Here. And from then on to now, I feel like there's been a tremendous shift in like the acceptance of this kind of poetry, and of course you winning the prize also signals a big shift lah.
But Desmond Con winning in 2016?
16.
Yeah. I mean, he was a friend, he was also a colleague in the 80s. Yeah, I mean, these are the signs. But again, I would say that that's because we are all in the same circle of literary clique. But I think the majority of people out there are not that, are still like, they have a certain idea of what poetry should be. And I would not try to delude myself thinking that this means I have arrived. Yeah, I would like to think that there's a lot more work to be done, and literature and poetry is still seen as something that to be tolerated by most people out there. I guess I would say that the younger generation, meaning anyone that's younger than me, are very much more receptive, and because you all are more worldly and more like very international, you literally would be educated overseas, so your exposure to other ways of looking at narratives, meaning in Singapore we like to pursue a certain kind of narrative, and you can't really stray. Either you may suffer some consequences, but I mean literary wise, I don't mean anything else. Yeah. So I think that the young generations are not going to take the dominant narrative as the default. You would want to question and interrogate and make your own fate. And I think that's the beauty of the plurality of styles that now you see in this generation. I mean, with the new Singapore poetries that was edited by Ko Ji Leong and Marilyn Tan, gave a good sense of the next generation of poets. Yeah.
So you talked about language poetry, I guess, with capital L, right? And we've talked about the death of the author just now as well. So for me, I think I would identify these things as traits of post-structuralism.
Yes.
But obviously this is something that the layman wouldn't understand. And just now you talked about how the average Singaporean, for example, still has really fixed notions of what poetry is. So perhaps could you try explaining post-structuralism to the layman?
When people ask me to explain theories, it's just a critical theory, right? And I would just say that in a layman's sense, as I do to my creative arts program mentees, I say that maybe don't write just because you feel like it. Maybe get a sense of your tradition that you're writing into. Okay, so I will explain the 20th century as the fulcrum of where poetry shifted. So I think before that you'll be writing Victorian, very received forms, like what Hao-Gong likes to use, received forms. But I think with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, you start realizing that it empowers that every man, that poetry does not have to be about doesn't have to extol elevated figures, about heroes, and so everything becomes, it's possible to write about the dog, the cat, the red wheelbarrow. So the 20th century tells you it empowers the people who are not necessarily heroes or martyrs and everything. With that comes the World Wars, the World War, partly a sense of a disappointment in the human endeavor and everything. And then sometimes I'm just generalizing here, okay? Please don't take my words like as if they are the way to only approach this. So structuralism came in because the world is hungering for structure, right? Like because Cold War, like so everything has to be, and of course industrialization, countries want to produce, and so structures are a way to understand and to grow and to progress somehow. That's why in the 50s, and of course in Asia, Singapore will be later. I guess that's what happens with they start realizing the side effects of industrialization, and that's where post-structuralism came in. The idea of like looking at industrialization and structuralism and realizing came at the expense of certain values, like like what you see now, climate change. So I see post-structuralism as a way to understanding. There are waves of human endeavors that respond to the previous one, and then in that way you will understand poetries or any other kind of art form as a social reflection of the changes of those times. So anything that is post, including language poetry, is to interrogate the structures that came before it, and figuring out why that it formed its own fascist and authoritarian ways of looking at it, and then you start realizing you have to destroy it or reconfigure it like a Lego block and start building it differently. And that's when post-structuralists would want to interrogate the ways of the world that we are now living in. Like, is it that in order to progress you need to have certain things like coal, like fossil fuels. So those are structures that I guess nowadays we don't necessarily take them as that you need to have that in order to progress. Yeah, so I don't know how this relates to literature. All I can say is that as someone who writes in these times, it's good to know into what traditional or cultures you're writing into, either in response to or in alignment with, so that you understand again. You contextualize yourself in this changing world, and whether you want to take on a certain cause, like maybe like, I know there's this thing called eco-poetics and stuff. Are you riding on it, meaning you actually, just latch onto it, but not really contextualize it against the changes of the world? Then therefore, sometimes you can tell when a collection, I just keep it to poetry, you can tell when a collection is on the surface really trendy or really echoes the issues of the day, but actually there's nothing underneath it in terms of new revolution, new ideas. Yeah. I don't know again whether I answered your question, but that's how I would explain post-structuralist to a layman who say that, what the hell are you writing about? Yeah.
I think another poetic tradition I identified would be like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but the poetics of indeterminacy.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So the most notable figure, I guess, would be John Ashbery, right?
Of course.
So I think your poetry for me can be said to be indeterminate, as in like meaning is kind of suspended and open to interpretation, right? So no one can say like this is the correct interpretation. And going back to what you said earlier about you not knowing exactly what you mean, right? I think that's the open-endedness, I think, is part of it. But I feel like with an alien artifact, there's also an alien logic, and and there's an alien logic is still a logic, right? And I think when I was reading your works, for example, certain lines like "there's nothing to it," alliterative tactics, and malapropisms, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, I think for me there is a method to the madness. So my question is, how do you deliberately write and edit in order to evoke that kind of indeterminacy?
Okay, I guess the word indeterminacy to me also means capturing accurately the intimacy. So actually, it's not indeterminate as in vagueness. So do not confuse or conflate indeterminacy with not knowing or drifting. It's actually a state of humility to not confine yourself to a inertia or a form or a definition in perpetuity. So that's what I would define it. Oops, sorry, that definition again. You mentioned certain phrases that I use like in things we trust, okay, I can tell you for sure because I don't want to, lead you on too long. Oops. These are allusions to certain phrases. I'm sure you know. Yeah, some of them could be like slogans. So you could pick up, I heard this before. These are slogans from a particular movement or maybe even an advertising campaign. So the idea of overhearing certain things, that you walk along the streets and you hear certain things, or like advertisements and stuff, it's very much Ashberian tactic as well. Like a lot of coupled phrases, quotations. So he was probably the first one to accurately reflect how humans actually talk. Just like who's that filmmaker who made films about? Oh yeah, I know, Robert Altman. If you know Robert Altman films, just check out any of his films. You would see that characters they talk over each other. You don't have the very like. Again, I'm stereotyping, like you would have speaker A say finish, then speaker B will reply. It's the idea of how you all actually talk is unrealistic. The realistic is when you hang out with your friends. I mean, unlike this podcast where we are trying to be very formal and clear with what we're trying to say. The truth is that we will inevitably speak over each other, and that's why I thought the idea of intimacy is that you will never have everything in complete sentences. You would have a lot of interruption, interjection, and layers of people talking over each other or correction. So much so that sometimes you don't hear very clearly somebody else in the background, but you want to hear. You are, and I think that's what Ashbery. Another poet of mine, John Yeow, that I like, people like that who are writing about those echoes in the background that you will actually want to hear more, because somehow you find, they're actually more interesting than the people who are now just pontificating to me face to face now. And that's also what I like in films, right? Like for instance, some of the films that I enjoy, maybe the main characters are supposedly the heroes, but actually those characters are not the most. You like the side character, you like the gay best friend of Julia Roberts in the kind of rom-com. So that's where this film come alive. So the idea of what you're told to like, what you're told to project your attention to, is a little too dogmatic, and I like to explore those maybe throwaway sentences, characters that are sidelined, characters that you're told that you're supposed to hate or not take seriously, and you not put them in the middle, but you try to incorporate them into a world in which they have a point of view. They can, they are not treated as if they are sidelined. I guess that's how I felt about my position then, 10 over years ago. Always look for the underdog. That's what I would say.
I have a question. I don't know if you want to jump in. Actually, so in some ways you're talking about the underdog, and in some ways not the unimportance of prizes and these forms of like outward recognition. But also in some ways you have become part of the establishment.
Yes, I know. I'm very aware of it.
So because you became director,
Yeah.
of the SWF, and then you won the prize, and so on and so forth. So how in some ways tell us a little bit about that, and also tell us a bit about your role as SWF director and what that was like. So that's
I mean, I
the
never
first question.
planned
Yeah.
to become one. I was on the committee. At the time, they have a steering committee that comprised folks from the scene. Like I represented the Straits Times because I was working in the Straits Times. But of course, as I was also a poet, right? So I was on the steering committee for many years. And then in 1990, they asked whether I was interested. At that time, I wasn't interested. But I sort of realized that I could introduce certain literatures or poetries of authors who seldom appear on the scene. So it kind of intruder sort of way, trying to introduce all those things that I feel have not been represented in Singapore. Meaning that you will not be the usual living white poets. But it also includes writers who write in different traditions and stuff, and also introducing other interdisciplinary programming, which music, films, dance. There were things that I thought would be easier to promote literature, because these are art forms that I always view as more glamorous than literature. Like you don't have to read a play before you watch a play. You can watch a play knowing zero about anything about it, and then come out and say, I can talk about the play. But there's no way you can talk about a book without reading the book, right? And it's a lot more torturous, a lot more lonely, a lot more like you cannot wink it. You cannot bluff your way through a book of poetry without reading the book and talking to the poet and say, I haven't read a book, but what is the book about? You can't. So SWF became a platform for me to try to make literature or make writing more, strangely, I would use that word, accessible here. More interesting, more intriguing, rather than the usual. We still have those panels and stuff and lectures, but also to actualize the writing in ways in which you can enjoy, for instance, commissioning plays, commissioning theater, dance thing, or a translation. So all those things that maybe now you see very, very common, at that time wasn't. Yeah. So the language groups were very siloed. Like, wait, honestly, do you attend a Malay program? Would you on your own? You would want to do that by having them on the same panel with other language, but in a way in which, I can otherwise you only absorb programs that are from your linguistic comfort zone. I was a journalist at the time, so I quit and I joined NEC to become the festival director, and I treated that as a way to introduce programming and writers that hopefully Singaporeans are like, I never thought. I think, for instance, Daryl here would be. I know you were very interested in John Yeow when he came, right? Yeah.
I have a second question, but now it's actually a cheeky one, which is goes back to the poetry. So you talked about death obsession in your last two books, and of course, if you know your Freud, death is often combined with eros, so thanatos and eros. And actually, if you read your poetry, there is an undercurrent of sex. There's a sexuality. There is a innuendo that you talk about, sadomasochism. So I'm going to ask you a question. What role does sexuality play in your poetry?
Well, there's a lot of sexual innuendos, and sexuality is a platform where a lot of things that cannot be said can be channeled or enacted through sexual role playing and stuff. I think Memento Mori, the first poem in that series, it has been kind of analyzed by Ko Ji Leong in an essay. I think it's available on QRS, and I think he picked up a lot of the allusions to films that or characters that use sex or things like that. And I think sex is the final frontier for our straight-laced society. I guess at this point I would like to mention someone like Marilyn Tan, who uses sex very, very, very in a very open and explicit way, but also in a very creative and interesting, using witchcraft and all those stuff. And and it also crosses boundaries between high culture and low culture, and I like that. Yeah, and films have a lot of sex and how they project sex. It's a platform for some topics which we would not want to talk about in Singapore, but you can use sexuality to discuss gender roles, politics, all those things which straight-laced societies will want to pigeonhole into binary oppositions. And it's where you can let down your guard, literally strip naked and be yourself, your authentic selves, whatever, and also in the privacy of where you are with a partner. And those are the things which I think I like to explore in writing.
I think one question for me, I think more to do with poetic craft, would be the question of form, right? I think, you're a writer who's very sensitive to form. For example, you justify your use of twin cinema when it comes to discussing themes of duality, multiplicity, for example. And I think one form that, personally puzzles me is prose poem. So could you share about how you view that form?
A prose poem looks like prose, but behaves like poetry. That would be my facetious way of explaining it. What that means that it really does look like prose passages, right? Paragraph after paragraph. It doesn't have the stanzaic thing. But when you read it, it doesn't have the logic of prose, meaning, traditional short story. It has the spirit of poetry. It means that when you read prose poem, it may not follow a narrative thread. It may not. It may not. So it does play against types. So a prose poem is the offspring of the best of both of these two genres. I want to say that I've seen a lot of prose poems written, supposedly call themselves prose poems, but they're not prose poems. They're just prose passages because they are just about a topic and they explain very clearly. It's point A to point B. It's very systematic, but it's not a prose poem. A prose poem should actually reconfigure the direction of how logic is. And therefore, when you never know where you're going to end up. If it's very logically explained, then it's not a prose poem. That's my very autocratic way of explaining it. Yeah.
I think another question I had with regard to form, right? Actually I haven't read Pretend I'm Not Here, so I've only read Secret Manta and One to the Dark Tower Comes, but in One to the Dark Tower Comes, there's like a structure, as you said, a framework. First the calendar instead of contents, and then throughout the collection, it's interspersed with the quarterly reports as well as a slit from sternum to pixel. So could you talk more about why you chose to work with like this kind of structure?
I think time is the underlying element that links all of this. Yes. I find that time. Yes, Kat. Yes. Time is what we are. Time they would define. Time is a capsule of who you are at a particular point, rather than thinking that you will remain unchanged. So Pretend I'm Not Here was rather out of time. While One to the Dark Tower Comes, it's almost like a durational art where you feel the change in histories and decades and centuries. So quarterly reports is a kind of cheeky way of trying to adopt the corporate speak, right? Quarterly reports, what have you done in the last 3 months, that kind of thing. Then you realize, it doesn't have the form of quarterly reports. In each quarterly report, you have a particular set of rules, or like one is a kind of like flotation system. It's all those are supposedly 21st century living terms and institutions or buildings or machinery that we are used to. And then within that, I try to break down how you can view, like just cycling or something. So you use very, very late modern conveniences, and then you try to demystify it in a way. As opposed to, A Slate from Sterner Epistle, it's a kind of double play, but it's also about how you butcher, right? So it's a kind of husbandry, a kind of vertical heights and stuff. It's a combination of my response to the 9/11. Yeah, so the first poem is about 9/11, about the invisible jumper, and then it moves to like the Egyptians and how Singaporeans, human beings, Singaporeans especially, like to build tall, obelisks, and basically we always aim for higher and higher and higher. So it has both the lateral and the vertical.
I think when I was comparing like Secret Manta and One to Dark Tower Comes, I think this is just like a kind of Easter egg, I guess. Like, I noticed that you used the words Mirror Lake and also like the symbol of the tower, I think, in Secret Manta as well. Yeah. So what do these symbols, I guess, represent or evoke for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just obsessed with objects of mystery, right? I mean, mirror lakes and towers in general have been there forever, right? Throughout human history or even prehistory, right? Lakes, when you travel around the world, humans are generally drawn to bodies of water, either the sea or lakes, right? And that's also become the center of human activities. Lakes are where human civilization begin, a lot of them, right? Towers are what I just said about that we tend to build. These are also monuments of to heroes and to loved ones, but also kind of to show the pinnacle of our human ability to conquer and to scale and maybe reach heavens. And when I travel, I'm sure you do too, you would be drawn. I'm sure most everyone would try to go to, like, you go to New York City, you will go to the, you might have gone to the Twin Towers, yeah. So things like that, and you go Chicago, yeah. So all those things, I would always use the tower as a marker, right, of where you are. Literally, geographically, like, I'm lost, but I know so I have a sense of where you are. And I use that as a metaphor to say, as a directional marker, as a milestone to represent human achievement. So all those, so One the Tower Comes becomes almost as if I'm trying to understand human beings and how they, how far we have come or how much we haven't come, in the sense that what is the continuity that link an Egyptian building the pyramid to the modern tower, right? It sounds completely like ambitious and pretentious, but when I started writing, I started with the quarterly reports. If it helps you to understand the germination of this collection, it was the quarterly reports that I had in mind. Then everything else falls into place when it was also about the death, of my father, and so death, living, history, all this come to play. I never explained this in this detail. I hope it doesn't really make the reading less interesting. It just hopefully lends a different complexion. Yeah, but what I'm telling you is just one way of reading it. Yeah.
One last question would be about, other art forms or media, for example, because, I mean, that is something that really, I guess, marks you out from other writers. So what do you think poetry can do that other art forms cannot do?
The difficulty or the limitation of poetry is precisely its strength, that it requires you to read the word, whatever punctuation, the semantics and everything. You literally have to wrestle with whatever you see, on paper or on computer, and that's where it should be, because it does not reveal its secrets at first glance. Like again, I'm being a bit facetious, like a movie, where it's visuals, right, or a song. You have it's so selfish and so private art form that you have no choice but to spend time with it, or be repulsed by it and say, I'm not going to spend more time with this writing because it's so crap, or it's so obtuse, or it's whatever. So if you're really intrigued, I guess good writing would be, to answer your previous question, is that would be good writing that you don't understand at first reading. I know people would say the other way around, but I think when you don't understand it, it could be that you have not caught up with it, that you needed to grow. Like for instance, the first time I read T.S. Eliot, whatever, 4 Quartets, Proof Rock, whatever, it's like, I don't think I understood. Yeah, whatever. But the point is that as you grow older, you appreciated it. So you use other words, right? Don't you agree? Suddenly you realize, wow, the secrets reveal themselves when somehow you have your mind and your synapses and everything thought, oh, yeah. That's why poetry is the art form that is demanding. It's completely toxic. It's very generous. It will reveal its, secrets or sexuality, if you want. Only if you are equally open and willing to let yourself be immersed in it. If you come with a certain expectations that I'm studying this for my O-level or A-level and I do want to score A, I'm not saying you can't, but you're not doing yourself a favor by appreciating the poetry for its sake. The idea of art for art's sake, the idea that why do you have to explain do you have to explain the meaningfulness or the usefulness of art or poetry or anything? Then you're missing the point. Yeah. If you only do things that are functional, then you might as well just be an animal, right? You do things because they are pleasurable, they are fun, they are pointless actually. Because if you do things that are full of, there is the point to it, you would not have pleasure, you'll hate it, you'll be a cog in the machine.
And that's it. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed, do share this podcast with your friends. It means a lot to us. Have a nice day. Goodbye.